Good evening. Welcome to DeFacto Review, a weekly roundup of news, current affairs here in Mongolia. Today in our program, Mr. Özgan from the Independent Research Institute of Mongolia will be filling in for Mr. Jagal again. Good evening, Mr. Özgan.
Good evening.
Good evening. And I'm Anand Tumurtaga. We're live on Facebook on MMB World, and you can join in the conversation on Twitter with the hashtag #Jagal_DeFacto. On to our program. The Erdenet Mining Corporation ownership dispute has led to the state of emergency or an emergency regime at the Erdenet plant. And in connection with the Erdenet Mining Corporation ownership dispute, 4 executives were arrested on Tuesday. Lastly, we will discuss the tragic accident that left 4 miners dead at the Altan Zaamar gold mines. So this was a very eventful week. A lot of things happened, and all coming down to where the private institution, where the state is attacking the private institution. So on Wednesday, the government of Mongolia declared a state of emergency at the Erdenet Mining Corporation for 6 months, and the government dismissed at least 6 officials at the plant and sealed their offices in order to look into the financial dealings of the plant. So why do you think the government declared a state of emergency or a state emergency regime at the plant?
Mm-hmm. Well, according to the head of the cabinet, Mr. Oyun Erden, he justified that the prime minister as well as the cabinet issued a decree number 91 in relation to the series of events that have been happening at Erdenet. To do with the ownership issue, 49%, and also the fact that the 51% that was owned by state has been related to the loan issue of the Just Group. And now, according to the latest court decision happened in London, Mongolian government, whether it's in a position having to pay $120 million or not. So justifying all these scandals and mismanagement, the government of Mongolia declared we need to take control since the current board of the Erdenet Mining Corporation has proven incapable of doing so. So that's why the government formed a working group to handle the situation and declared this emergency regime for up to 6 months.
Yes, and one thing that I don't understand is that can the government do this? Can the government basically take over like the private institution? They basically attack the private sector of Mongolia. Can they do that? And can you maybe give us a brief insight into what is Declaration 91 maybe?
So there's a law that was passed in 1991 that allows the government to take over state-owned enterprises' activities.
This is before our constitution, basically, right?
Before the democratic constitution. So that was issued in 1991. And according to this law, it is possible, in case of emergencies, to overlook existing standard laws and regulations and enforce this kind of special regime and emergency regime. In the 91st resolution that was recently passed, they quoted as a basis for decision the law on government and roughly said other relevant laws. So because I'm not a legal specialist, I can't respond fully, but there is some room for interpretation for this event. And secondly, the reason why government is having this special operation at the Erdenet mining site is because the 51% is owned by so-called state-owned, which represent people's public finance as well. So I think that's why they are justifying their action based on this state-owned entity.
Can you maybe give us a brief insight into how this dispute happened? I understand that Erdenet, like the history of the Erdenet mine is that it was built in the 1970s with the help of the Russians, and then in 2016 we could have taken back that 49%. The government could have taken back the 49% of those shares, but they didn't. They sold it to Mongolian Copper Corporation. And why did that happen? Maybe give us a insight into that dispute, please.
Well, first of all, I should highlight it's a very complicated story, and even for myself, understanding it was very difficult. And also, given the fact that a lot of the information is not publicly available, and it's very closed. And each time we hear a statement or press release by different parties, whether it comes from the private company, which is Mongolian Copper Corporation, or the government side, they each release different information each time. So it's really hard to make concrete conclusions, but I can only speculate. So briefly, what happened was that whether the government declining or refusing from its own possibility of owning the 49% share has been legal or not is now currently being disputed.
And the head of the cabinet secretariat disclosed that information, right?
Yes. As we discussed last week, he disclosed the protocol meeting minutes of the cabinet and what process has happened, which might open up new cases or new debate about the process.
But is it justified that Mr. Oyurtin said that in the minutes that Saakhanbilik, our former prime minister, told that the Mongolian Copper Corporation is a legal entity to the Trade Development Bank of Mongolia, and that was the case that basically Trade Development Bank used Mongolian Copper Corporation to buy the 49% of shares. Is that a just ground to take back that 49% by force, basically?
That's what, according to my knowledge, what the government is trying to understand and to prove if it's the case or not. At the moment, it's not finalized yet. From the Trade and Development Bank side, their statement was that we only advised and we only provided financial and legal consultancy for Mongolian Mining Corporation. So now we have these two opposing justifications from both sides with different types of information. That's why disclosing all the information like it happened last week is very useful for our discussion.
So I assume that this incident is also connected with the next topic we're about to discuss, the arrest of the executives of the Trade Development Bank of Mongolia, the Erdenet and Orkhon. And we see that Mongolia supposed to have a rule of law, basically. But why is there a law like that it gives basically our government the will to take over any private entity at their will? And do you think this is just, basically? Do you think this law should stay in our constitution, basically?
It was very interesting that there was a very scandalous, let's say, arrestation of these four individuals. And all the media and TV outlets were there as well. But they were released soon after.
Yes.
So the main question was why the arrest happened in the first place and why there was a release. The reason why they were released was that the court decision said that there was no final decision to arrest those people, and the police and the Anti-Corruption Agency Working Group have arrested them on unnecessary grounds.
Well, before we talk into that, let's finish up on the first topic. Maybe, so again, do you think it was just by the government to take this 49% of shares or to call an emergency regime at the Erdenet plant, basically?
Can you repeat the question again?
Was it just for the government to declare an emergency regime at the plant? And how does this bode with maybe outsiders? Why did they do this, basically? Maybe give it just...
Yes, basically this whole event, what it's showing to public and to also foreign investors potentially is that there is really a lack of proper corporate governance within the state-owned enterprise Erdenet. Why? the government cabinet had to decide the board has been incapable of delivering its own duties, and why this hasn't been discussed earlier, why financial audits or all these check mechanisms didn't work in the past, and suddenly we came to a situation where even such kind of emergency regime has to be put in place. So it just shows that that we are now seeing only the tip of the iceberg of the problem, but behind that there is a huge, massive problem to do with appointment of key managers. There's always a scandal of procurement issue with Erdenet, and how transparent it is. Just before coming to the studio, I checked their website, and glass account law, according to the glass account law, they have to publish their financial reports, but it wasn't working. All the information to do with board members wasn't there. So crucial information like that is not transparent, and nobody is really asking it from our side. International NGOs and different researchers have been pointing out this problem for a long time, but no action has been taken so far.
Well, hopefully there will be more accountability and transparency in Mongolia, and maybe this will be a precedent, basically. So in connection with what happened at the Erdenet plant on Tuesday, the CEO and the chairman of the board of the Trade Development Bank and the CEO of the Mongolian Copper Corporation were arrested. The Mongolian Copper Corporation, again, I would specify, holds the 49% of the shares of the Erdenet Mining Corporation. And the government stated there was no, and the individuals that were arrested on the charges of money laundering and fraud. And my question to you is that, why arrest these individuals now, basically? Why arrest them now? Maybe why not previously, though?
So this scandal has been ongoing, and the public, also the media, has been discussing this issue for the last 2 years, since 2016, actually. And in the last 2 years, we saw a series of events. Our Speaker of Parliament has been replaced. There was also protest happening at the square, few of them against this issue.
Yes.
Also, in the meantime, the scandal of 51% being used as a loan guarantee for another private individual's, private company's loan has been disclosed. So this hasn't happened just today. It's been happening in the last 2 years. Maybe today we see the culmination of the events. Mr. Orhan, he in his statement, he stated that he was very upset. Why, rather than just calling him to the police station,
this was after when he was released, right? He did a press briefing. And
exactly.
Please continue.
Yes. So he was wondering why such excessive force had to be used on these individuals. And also the owner of the Mongolian Copper Corporation, he stated that there are maybe some illegal activities from the government side, that they might be paying different types of information to be disseminated through journalists. And how is it possible that the head of cabinet secretariat ordering police to conduct such arrests? But of course, we see both sides, whereas the government is saying these individuals need to be investigated and to clarify whether there's a money laundering crime or not.
So if these 4 individuals were arrested for the connections of maybe money laundering and also with connection with the Erdenet plant, and we know that the person who gave that 49%, who allowed it, was our former Prime Minister, Sakhanbilik. And why wasn't he detained? Why wasn't he involved in this? And should we even arrest him also, basically?
Well, I can't really respond to the question why he wasn't arrested. I guess the working group established by Anti-Corruption Agency and the Police Department are looking into these issues. And of course, one important actor in this whole crime or potential events that are being investigated is also from government side. So it's only fair all parties should be at least questioned. So only based on this principle I can answer that, but I can't really say why specifically.
And Mr. Orhan, in his statement, he talked about that when he was arrested, they didn't even ask him any questions relating to his arrest. They just took a statement that he was arrested, and he talked about to the media that this was just basically a show, like a political show to show people that there's like a one bank and maybe like a one person that controls everything wrong in society. And do you agree with his statement that this was just a political ploy to show that people that to show the people that they're doing something to that they're basically attacking an evil and they're stopping that evil? Do you agree with that statement though?
Yes, certainly I would say it's political. This whole affair is political, and as I explained earlier, this event has been happening in the last 2 years. And also really also this tip of the iceberg that I would like to highlight again. We're only talking of this specific case, but this type of case have been becoming very common, and where people have been arrested and released, like that has been happening in the last few years non-stop. So I don't see just this specific case, but the overall atmosphere now formed in our political arena. Also the main debate between the private sector and the government. Private sector saying why government is attacking us, how about human rights and things like that. Whereas the government saying why there is a few people taking all the state assets potentially illegally. So both sides, we can't really tell which one is telling the truth or not. As citizens and civil society, what we need to pay attention is whether all these processes are happening according to the due processes, according to the law, and following human rights principles, and whether they're being disclosing the information enough to public. So these kind of questions we should be asking.
And one criticism that basically some people summed up online was that these individuals talk about human rights, but they never talked about it previously, though. And do you think that's justified when they didn't talk about human rights before, but they're talking about it now, basically?
Each case we need to talk about human rights.
No matter if they talked about it previously.
Yes, no matter whether who's talking or who's not talking. We are a democratic country respecting human rights, so any event or activity should be following this principle.
So my last question on this topic is that will this how basically Mr. Randolph Copper from the Trade Development Bank said it clearly that the world is watching this, and it does not bode well with foreign investors. And do you agree with his statement that this does not give a good precedent to foreign investors to come to Mongolia?
Maybe, but of course we are a sovereign state. Like I said previously, if the government follows all the due processes and act according to principles and be open and really justify what has been going on, then I think the investors would understand, and maybe there would be support for open case. But if, for example, the government is acting as it is now, really in an incomprehensible way, in ad hoc way, it of course raises questions about whether it's purely driven by political interests or really it's concerned about principles and issues of money laundering and things like that. So the government has more responsibility and duty to guide this process in a responsible way.
Okay. On that note, let's move on to our next topic. 10 days ago, an accident occurred at the Altan Zaamar mine in central province, Zaamar Som, where the open pit gold mines collapsed and left 4 men dead. Officials seem to know what caused the accident, but they're unwilling to talk about it. And why do you think the National Emergency Management Agency hasn't issued an official statement about this accident?
So just to give a scope about this kind of occupational health and safety hazards. Per year, at court, there are around 50 or 60 cases being investigated. And unfortunately, the common practice how these decisions have been made is that the managers or the engineers working at the mining companies are often sanctioned, but not the owners of those companies. So the main question is if it's okay for the owners to get away from this kind of events where even people have to lose their lives, not to mention all the environmental damage or local community damage that the companies have done. So there is no incentive from the owner's side to stop this kind of event in the long term. It will continue. This case will be closed. Public will forget. Things will move on, and this will happen again. So this is the common image we see today.
So you're basically saying that these kind of accidents happened previously. Maybe not. This accident happened in a large scale. 4 people died, but maybe previously like only 1 person died, or maybe there was an accident that injured somebody, fatally injured somebody, and it was not really showcased on the media. And you're saying that the engineers get collateral, or the people who are in charge of the miners got collateral, and not the owners. And do you think also that the person who owns this mine will also get away with this, maybe?
Yes, the main justification for getting away is that the owners claim that they have transferred their responsibilities to those CEOs or engineers and people like that, so they should bear the responsibility. But the international standard is that they should also give the rights and resources for those people to operate according to the law. But in many cases in Mongolia, this doesn't happen. There's really savings or not enough resources spent on ensuring safety, occupational health and safety, first of all, and expanding things like environmental rehabilitation or mitigating the damage caused to local communities. So one thing very concerning about this case is that the government agency, General Agency for Specialized Inspection itself has issued several times that this mining site should be, the license should be revoked.
Really? On this mine?
On this specific mine. Also in 2018, environmental inspectors for Ministry of Environment have also come to the same conclusion that the mine has been violating Mongolian law. We call it the Long Law. And they tried to revoke it, but it has never happened. So now the question is why the Minister of Mining or the relevant agencies haven't revoked their social licenses, why necessary measurements haven't been taken so far. Is this because they just don't care, or is this because they have some affiliations, or conflict of interest? So these kind of information we need to find out.
Do you know the owner of this Altan Zaamar mines? Do you know who the owner is? Maybe if you do know, maybe give background information on it.
It was written on news websites. One individual, I forgot the name. One individual's name, but personally I don't know this person or how this person is affiliated to others. Precisely to do with this issue, Mongolian NGOs have been urging the government to pass laws on beneficial ownerships, and also there's a special term also called politically influencing people. So because in our laws these terms are not clearly defined, we're not really asking responsibilities from the owners and their affiliated people on this kind of events.
So basically you're saying that the National Emergency Management Agency did not issue a statement on the accident because maybe they have a stronghold on politics and they didn't want to disclose any of those information. And if that's true, why do you think that is? Why do you think that maybe who should then basically go after these people? If the government's not going to do it, maybe then who else basically? Who should take accountability?
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's not NEMA is not the body who has to issue a statement. It's mostly the GASI, the General Agency for Specialized Inspection. So according to their press release, they already identified the cause of the accident, but it has been withheld by the prosecutors.
The general prosecutors.
General prosecutors. And of course, the reason why could be linked, because I heard that there are already allegations and suing happening at the moment. So there are procedural laws that prevent from disclosing sensitive information to public. So I guess it could be linked to that. But in any case, what GASI could be disclosing at the moment is, for example, how many mining companies are there that are in the same risk level as what we saw at the Altan Zaamar, and how what the government is doing to prevent from similar things happening in the short term. For example, in Brazil, what happened at the Vale company, we saw that the government shut down or froze operations of other mining companies that had risks. So we don't see any statement like that from GASI. If they have been unable to stop the operations, why so? Whether they receive pressure from other politicians or any other bodies, they could be sharing this kind of information, using this time as an opportunity to educate people. On the other hand, why the Minister of Mining is not saying anything about the loss of those 4 individuals?
Do you think he should, though? Do you think he should?
Certainly, yes. He's the Minister of Mining. And Mongolia declared that mining is one of the important sectors for economic growth and also social development. So this kind of issue shouldn't be overlooked. In more than that, even the Prime Minister should be talking about it. How come there have been proposals to stop this operation, and on the other hand, it hasn't stopped, and now we see we lost 4 individuals.
It's like they attacked one mine, but they don't attack the other to stop. And people died in the other mine. On the other hand, Erdenet plant nobody died there, basically. It was just maybe some fraudulent activities, but we're not sure. But people died here. So my last question is, how can we improve this sector's management and mitigate these kind of risks in the future?
Well, first of all, of course, there needs to be a lot of changes in legal changes. Currently, we have a lot of regulations regarding environmental impact assessments, but not so much on social impact assessment. Social impact assessment is only a part of environmental ones. So we saw in Zaamar, local protests have been very widely happening in the last few years, but no one has taken measures about that because the political will or government's attention on social impact is very low. So that needs to be changed. And also the companies need to adopt practices, Indonesian best practices, basically, and learn from each other. There are companies that have good practices.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thanks for giving us more insight about this, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation. Well, thanks for watching DeFacto Review on MMB World. We'll see you next week, and with more news and current affairs here in Mongolia. Goodbye.
One is the fund of future.